The ceremony had been grand, his father's way of showing off power, but to him it had been nothing more than a business deal. Now, in his massive estate, silence stretched between them. Wine stood near the window of the bedroom nervously as she asked him, Wine, where do I sleep? Jungkook, sitting on the armrest of a leather chair, loosened his tie and sighed as he said, Anywhere but here. She flinched just slightly but recovered quickly. Fine. Understood. Her voice was unaffected. That irritated him. He expected disappointment, maybe even anger, but she simply turned, grabbed a pillow, and left without another word. Jungkook exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. This was exactly what he wanted. Distance. No attachments. So why did her quiet acceptance bother him? He sighed and went to bed trying to sleep, although he wanted to ask her to come back, but he forced himself not to. Next day, after Jungkook sat on the dining table, flipping through his phone, he barely acknowledged Vine as she moved around the kitchen. Not that he asked her to cook, he had chefs for that, but she insisted on making breakfast herself. The scent of eggs and toast filled the air. Then a plate was placed in front of him. He glanced up at it. I didn't ask for this. Vine wiped her hands on a towel and said, I know. He stared at the food, then at her. Then why? She tilted her head as if she was confused by the question. Fine, because you have a long day ahead. Jungkook narrowed his eyes at her answer. Jungkook, you don't have to play the perfect wife. Fine. I'm not playing anything. I just wanted to do this. Accept it if you want to. She stated her point and disappeared. She didn't stay or wait for any praise. Jungkook looked down at the plate, then looked at the stairs from where she went up. He sighed and shook his head, ignoring everything and taking a bite. Although he liked it so much, he didn't want to admit it. He was afraid he would get used to all of this. He took a deep breath, cleaned his mouth with the napkin, and went to his work without eating anything. Jungkook's day was brutal. Meetings, phone calls, and dealing with people who either feared him or wanted something from him. It was exhausting. By the time he returned home, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. The house was dimly lit, quiet except for the faint sound of movement from the kitchen. He shrugged off his jacket and loosened his tie, heading towards the noise. Wine was there standing by the stove, stirring a pot. She didn't notice him at first, as she was too focused on whatever she was cooking. Jungkook leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Jungkook, didn't I say we have chefs? Wine didn't even turn. I know. His jaw ticked. Then why are you still doing this? She finally glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Fine. Because you barely ate this morning. He frowned. He frowned and said, That's my problem. She, she thought he must have not liked her breakfast. That's why he left it unfinished. So she tried her best at the dinner and really wanted him to eat. She let out a small sigh, stirring the pot again. Fine. I will put it there. If you're hungry, then don't force it. At least try it. I tried hard on this one. You will like it. The way she said it, so calm, so unaffected, made something stir in his chest. He was annoyed. He watched her for a moment longer before pushing off the door frame. He grabbed a glass of water, taking a sip as he observed her movements. Jungkook, you're too nice, he muttered. Wine raised a brow. And that bothers you? Yes, that was his answer, but he didn't say it. Instead, he scoffed and walked away. He knew she was different, and he hated that he was starting to notice. Wine put the curry in a bowl and went inside one of the guest rooms where she slept yesterday to sleep again. Meanwhile, Jungkook in his room was turning sides again and again, trying to sleep. Although he was deadly exhausted, he couldn't sleep because of the immense thoughts about her in his mind. He frustratingly sat up on the bed, running his hand through his hair. He sighed and went downstairs for that bowl of curry. He opened the fridge and took the bowl, microwaved it, and started eating. Because he knew if he didn't eat that, he wouldn't be able to sleep the whole night. It was so good that even though he finished the whole of it, he still wanted to eat more of it. Next day, when Wine woke up, Jungkook was already gone. He was afraid that if she made something for him again, or if he looked in her eyes again, he would want to stay, want to eat, and he didn't want to get used to all of this. Wine saw the empty bowl in the kitchen and smiled at it. Jungkook returned late today. His shirt was slightly unbuttoned, his sleeves rolled up. The weight of his work clung to him, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He walked into the living room, only to stop when he saw Wine had fallen asleep on the couch. Curled up under a thick blanket, a book rested upon her stomach. Jungkook sighed while looking at her. He stepped closer, frowning. The house was big. There were guest rooms. She could have slept anywhere. But watching her lie down there, his fingers twitched. He should leave her there. That's what he told himself, but his body moved before his mind could catch up. Carefully, he picked her up. She stirred slightly, but didn't wake. He felt how warm she was. Jungkook clenched his jaw as he carried her upstairs, pushing the thoughts aside. He laid her down there on the bed, pulling the blanket over her. He kept looking at her for a few minutes, and his chest tightened, but he shook his head and left the room, switching off the lights. Next day, when he returned home, he noticed she was in the kitchen again. He remembered how he left without eating anything in the breakfast again. He watched her from the doorway. She was standing by the stove, her back to him. Jungkook. She never gives up, does she? Jungkook, finally deciding to talk to her. You're still awake? Wine turned slightly, offering a small, tired smile. I wanted to make your favorite. Jungkook. You know my favorite? She smiled widely and nodded. Yes, it's curry, right? No wonder you ate the whole of it that day. Jungkook swallowed and looked away. Jungkook. It's just, I was hungry. It's not my favorite or anything. Fine's smile faded. Oh, Jungkook. But I'm hungry today too. I will eat it. Fine. Really? She smiled again and turned towards the stove again. As he looked at her, he noticed how her hands trembled as she stirred. Her breaths were shallow too. Jungkook. You are okay? She was about to answer him, but then she inhaled sharply, hardly gripping the counter. He thought she was about to fall, so he flinched forward. Fine? Fine. I'm fine. She fake smiled, He knew she was lying, and Jungkook hated liars. Before she could stop him, he was at her side, reaching for her wrist. His touch was firm, but her skin was burning. Jungkook, you're in pain? Vine swallowed, looking away. It's nothing, just cramps. He exhaled sharply. She was on her period, and despite that, she was standing here, making his favorite meal instead of resting. He didn't know, but at least he knew she was sick, and something inside him twisted. Jungkook, go to bed. Fine. I'm almost done. Jungkook, fine. Go to bed. For the first time, she looked up at him, truly looked at him. Her eyes were tired. Jungkook, she whispered, and he realized it then. Why, she felt different. She wasn't like his ex. She wasn't pretending. And for the first time in years, Jungkook found himself falling into her eyes and the way she cared. It was dangerous, but for once, he wasn't sure if he cared.